So design review is broken. It doesn't give the community the opportunity to have meaningful input, and it takes too long.
Well, that's City Councilmember Dan Strauss there, chair of the council's Land Use Committee, talking about some changes for Seattle when it comes to design review, the process used to gauge the appearance of new construction, etc. The city's put that process on hold, essentially, with the building of affordable housing. But do we need that process at all? Some questions there. Also, what impact will a changing Public Safety Civil Service Commission have on Seattle's anemic efforts to bring in new police officers? And what kind of city council are we going to have by the end of this year with at least 4 council members not running again? Well, we're talking about that and a whole lot more on Seattle News, Views, and Brews this week. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. And I'm joined by my co-host, as always, David Croman of the Seattle Times. And David, I mentioned this before we got online here. We actually saw each other in person a few days ago at KUOW for Week in Review. It was really good to see you. I'm glad that we're still in the flesh, or at least a little bit.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, it was great to actually do something in person. Between COVID and a new baby, I don't leave the house all that often. So
that's all right.
For the last few years. So it's nice.
That's right. Hang in there, man. Hang in there. Thank you very much, David. I love a good podcast on StreamYard, but it was really good to see you too. Thank you, David. Thank you to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. They're on the first floor of Seattle City Hall. And a big, big thanks to our patrons too. Just this past week, we had Linda join us at the $5 level. Linda, I'm going to send out your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews sticker. You can get yours today, too, if you pledge that low amount of $5 a month. Also, Mug Club members, you are the coolest. These are the OGs here. Another mugshot sent in by Alex, a mug full of screws in front of a house he's working on. This dude's so tough, he drinks those for breakfast. Alex, I love it. Thank you for sending those in. I know I'll be hearing more from you soon. So please do support the show as best you can. The $5 level is what we're suggesting. We'll get that sticker out to you, and my undying thanks as well. Thanks also to Converge Media for airing the video version of this podcast Wednesdays at 7. Let's get going with Right Here, Right Now. Well, David, I am diving deep into the council agenda this week. At just about the time we're recording this, the Public Safety Civil Service Commission is the topic of conversation at the council's Public Safety Committee meeting. So the council is in the process of reappointing this commission's executive director, Andrea Scheel. And why is this important? Well, this commission is in charge of administering the tests to bring in new police officers and firefighters, for that matter. But the SPD, as we know it, really hurting in its recruitment. And this commission is trying a lot of new ideas, opening up the testing process to just about 365 days a year, allowing for more remote testing options to make sure travel isn't a barrier for candidates. David, I'm drawing from this that the council is trying just about everything, and I mean everything, to bring in new officers. I just wonder how much the Public Safety Civil Service Commission is going to help out here. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, the Public Safety Civil Service Commission, I think, has always been kind of the forgotten child of the various kind of police systems. They also
agencies that are connected to it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. They also handle fire department business too.
Right.
For a while, the Public Safety Civil Service Commission was in the accountability world of policing. Police could kind of go down 2 different tracks. And the Civil Service Commission was kind of where the police department sent the officers who they were pretty sure had actually done the thing that they were accused of doing.
Right.
So some of the kind of most egregious examples of police unaccountability would end up in the Civil Service
Lack of accountability. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they also got, we also heard some about them a few years ago because they had talked about, because you get points on these exams to become a police officer, and they expanded some of those points to, you got extra points if you could speak another language or, came from maybe were in the Peace Corps. It's pretty standard for you to get extra points if you've been in the military. And so they were talking about kind of expanding that to other skills. But as far as their ability to increase the number of people who are coming into the police department, I think it's going to take a little more than what happens in the Civil Service Commission. But it's an office that serves a sort of not often seen, but probably more important than we might think role in that whole hiring process.
Yeah, I just remember this was really front and center a couple of years ago. Remember when officers were starting to leave the department? It was in the middle of CHOP and all this other kind of stuff. And Councilmember Herbold, I remember, the chair of the Public Safety Committee, was saying to Carmen Best, who was then the chief, was like, all right, we can use the Public Safety Service Commission here to make sure that we're officers that are let go.
Yeah.
We could have these officers that have more experience let go before the ones that have less experience, that might be members of communities of color, et cetera. So I think this agency can come to the fore at some point. And I just dovetailing on your point earlier with regard to the different points that the officers get, the commission's putting this program in place in June of this year. Candidates who have done direct community service for more than 2 years. So this is something where they're in communities. Peace Corps is a great example, but I think this is a little more localized. They're going to get preference to be hired here. And this really just feels like a part of a trend, David, that we've seen over the past several years for a lot of different police departments out there. Officers trying to be less of a military force, I guess, and more of a community connector, a community guardian, a community advocate. Do you see that too here?
Yeah, I think that's the goal, and that was the goal too with the preference points for additional languages and some kind of level of service. I seem to recall. I mean, of course, they don't cover this stuff day in and day out anymore, but I seem to recall that very few ever actually took advantage of those preference points. Yeah. And I think some of the officers that did. I mean, I think in part some of the goal was to recruit officers who maybe spoke languages from East Africa or from some immigrant communities, and I seem to remember that the officers who got the points, I think they spoke like French and German, and which is valuable, but I don't know that was exactly the demographic they were going for. So I mean, I think that's an interesting point. I've forgotten actually that the Civil Service Commission was brought into the forefront when Councilmember Herbold was talking about out of order hiring
layoffs.
The civil service, there was some question about whether that was possible or not, and I think the Civil Service Commission is sort of in that bucket of government agencies that would really prefer to not be in the spotlight and not be
very true
asked to weigh in on these highly charged decisions. And so I remember actually asking them a few times if this is something that they could do, and they never really, as far as I can remember, gave super straight answers. And then it turned out it didn't. Because I think the answer was we don't really know if this is possible, and then it never really became relevant because so many officers left the department that there wasn't actually any direct layoffs. happening. So
just a very interesting commission to look at. And I think you're right. This is an agency that doesn't like to be in the spotlight, but they are very much this week in talking with the city council, and everything that has to do with police right now is so high profile for them. Well, guess what? If you thought that was a deep dive on the council's agenda, here's something in front of the full council on Tuesday afternoon that I thought was really interesting, David. So the council is re-amending its lease with the Benaroya Hall Music Center. This is the entity that leases this property from the city. It's a city-owned property, actually, and it was opened in 1998. But COVID, as you know, has really hammered the performing arts here and around the country. Things are starting to get back to normal, but here's what the council's doing. It's saying those concession payments that are supposed to come into the city each year from Benaroya, $760,000, we're going to stop asking for that and ask the center to reinvest that into capital programs for Benaroya. And then it's also saying Benaroya has to show annually $1.2 million in public benefits to go along with this public benefit rent. And that can be discounted tickets, community education, and service. David, I really wanted to bring this up because it feels like kind of a save the arts kind of a moment, especially with Benaroya, thinking about where it is on 3rd Avenue in Seattle, which is such a challenge for the city from a public safety perspective. What do you make of what the council's doing here with Benaroya?
Yeah, I think you're right that it's part of I guess it's like you were saying, sort of twofold, which is just trying to help out arts organizations in the era of COVID because they're all struggling. But I think probably it's more in line with what the second piece, what you're saying, of the council sort of starting to think about 3rd Avenue. And, Benaroya is right on the edge of kind of the, if you just go one block north of Benaroya,
that's right.
That whole stretch there is, I haven't been down there in a few weeks, but I was there a couple of months ago, and it's empty, it's all boarded up.
You got Wild Ginger, you got Gelatiamo, and then beyond that, Piroshki actually just jumped back in, so we'll see what happens there. But a lot of question marks and a lot of empty storefronts.
And so, Benaroya's success is pretty crucial to that stretch. I don't know anything about the state of Benaroya Hall right now. I don't know how much in need of help they are, but if you're a council sort of looking to help out and revitalize Third Avenue, I guess starting by kind of anchoring the institutions that are there a little bit more makes some amount of sense. Because Ben Arroyo that's an entire city block, so you want to make sure that they're doing okay, I suppose.
Yeah, and I know we don't talk about the arts a lot on this podcast, but it is really something that makes our region cool. I think it's a big piece of it. And I recall reading a King County report last year that said about a third of the people involved with the local arts industry are considering leaving the area. And I know rising cost of living is a key part of that, but I kind of look at what the city's doing to help Ben Arroyo. I think about smaller arts organizations in the city too. I just wonder what 2023 is going to bring for them. It has been such a challenging time to try to put COVID behind us. And what I know about Ben Arroyo, David, is that, it's a hall that fits about 2,500 people, maybe a half house when they started off this past year in the fall when they began their symphony program there. So I just worry about, if this needs to happen with some of these bigger programs, what's happening to some of these smaller ones? I think they might be in trouble in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I mean, I hope not. I don't know. I do think probably some combination of people still just being hesitant. I went to a reading of David Sedaris, and I think that was probably the maybe summer 2021. I don't know. It was in this period where I think people kind of thought vaccines were the end of COVID, and it was this really joyous occasion because it felt like, okay, we've kind of put this behind us. Of course, we know that's not the case anymore. And so I hadn't heard the thing about half full house at the symphony. That's too bad to hear. But I also wouldn't be surprised. I think people are kind of hesitant to go near Third Avenue. I mean, maybe sometimes that's fair. Sometimes it's a little overblown, I think. But regardless, the message that people are getting is going to Third Avenue is not a good idea. And so I think that probably has something to do with it too. I mean, especially if you think of the clientele that is likely to go to Ben Arroyo Symphony concert, it's going to be older and wealthier. And so, like you said, I hope it's not a sign of things to come for the broader art scene. The broader art scene, in my opinion, the bigger issue is the housing cost issue. I mean, it's hard to be a struggling artist in this town. Ben Arroyo seems like maybe that's kind of about bigger kind of systemic issues around Third and COVID.
Yeah. I'll just struggle working in local media, and we'll see how that goes. I hear exactly what you're saying. All right, well, up next, it sure seems like the people who are not running for Seattle City Council are almost making more headlines than the ones who are. We're going to have some details coming up on Now Hear This. So late last week, we heard the news from Kshama Sawant, the city council's longest tenured member, that she would not be running again. She's going to head up a group called Workers Strike Back as she pushes for a nationwide socialist movement and the end of capitalism as we know it. Her targets in her speech last week, not just the threat of right-wing, as she put it, but even people in her own socialist movement and progressives as well. Here's a piece of what she said.
Since I was elected in 2013, more than 200 self-identified Democratic Socialist candidates have been elected nationally. But unfortunately, with rare exceptions, the overwhelming majority of them have abandoned their campaign promises and failed to stand up to the political establishment.
David, we talked about this a little bit on KUOW last week, but I just wanted to drill down on this idea of, if Councilmember Sawant is trying to build a movement, doesn't that take some coalition building at some point? I mean, she name-checked AOC, Pramila Jayapal as corporate sellouts, basically, in her speech as well. She pushed back on union leadership in some ways. Where's the coalition? Where's the movement?
Well, Sawant, this is exactly how I would expect Sawant to go out, because she's never been loyal to individuals. But she's always been loyal to the cause, and we see that here, which is, Pramila Jayapal kind of went out on a limb early on and endorsed her. I mean, that's Jayapal at the time, she wasn't in Congress yet, but had eyes, I think, on national politics, and went out on a limb and endorsed basically a Marxist Trotskyite, and then here, which I'm sure helped lend some credibility to Sawant and help her get elected. And then here's Sawant on her way out, kind of ragging on Jayapal's tenure in Congress. So, I think for Sawant, the kind of personal politics thing has always been the enemy, which is when you sort of backroom dealing, sort of handshake deals, backslapping, even if people in your own party like those personal, it should never be about kind of personal relationships. Is her thing. It should always be about the cause. Which you got to hand it to her. It means that she has always been exactly the person that she is. I mean, she's the same person she was when she got elected, and she has not let any other individual knock her off that course. She is who she is, and I think a lot of that is because she's very laser focused on her idea of what the overall goal is. The problem, as I see it, and I think as you just illustrated, is I think that has a ceiling. At a certain point, you need other people to join your movement to grow it. And I think that the perfect example is actually the Democratic Socialists of America, which has socialist in it, but has opened its doors in a way that has allowed people who are, kind of hardcore socialists to all the way to sort of maybe socialist curious or just kind of supportive of larger social programs. And as a result, that organization has grown a ton. I mean, Bernie Sanders is the kind of flag bearer, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it's really grown a bunch, whereas Socialist Alternative in the exact same timeline, which is very dogmatic, has really strong lines in the sand, has not grown, has shrunk, and in fact has sort of had to join forces with, I think, very reluctantly with the Democratic Socialists of America to remain relevant. And so from a sort of moral consistency standpoint, you got to hand it to Sawant. She is who she is. She believes what she believes. She's she's not going to compromise even an inch, and she never has. That leaves me a little skeptical as far as its momentum beyond the Seattle City Council.
Right, and this national movement she's trying to push for. Just looking back here locally, though, David, in the council races that are ahead, I got to say the silence is deafening from incumbent Dan Strauss in District 6, from incumbent Tammy Morales in District 2. How does 4 council members deciding not to run again affect the decisions of Strauss and Morales out there? Councilmember Lewis is the only incumbent so far in the district races who says he wants another term.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I imagine they'll do what they want to do, sort of regardless of what their colleagues wanted them to do. I would be.
Does it make it more difficult to make that decision, I guess?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. At the same time, is it more difficult, if you hate the job, which I think not everyone who is on the Seattle City Council hates the job, but some people do who have the, I think there's a reason that Alex Peterson is leaving after one term. There's a reason why Councilmember Juarez is leaving. There's a reason why Rob Johnson left after 3 years. It's a hard job, and people come after you. People expect you to be, hold you responsible for some things that are your responsibility, but genuinely some things that you have no control over, and you get death threats. It's a tough job. And so all of that combined, if it's really not sitting well with you, the decisions of your colleagues, you might pause a little bit, but if suffering it out for another 4 years is probably not worth it. I will say that this is sort of, we converted from 9 citywide seats to 7 district and 2 citywide seats. And the headlines of that obviously was the district representation, but a sort of underplayed and undervalued part of that decision, I think, was the fact that 7 people would be up for election every 4 years.
That's a big potential turnover, and I look at that. That's
exactly.
I mean, say what you will about people staying in office too long. Yeah.
And so it's hard even to look at how this compares in the past, because we just haven't had that many elections where there are 7 people up for re-election. So I don't know. I mean, we'll see about. I would be genuinely surprised if Councilmember Morales didn't run again. It seems like she's kind of found. Took her a couple years, but it seems like she's kind of found her foothold. She's really taken up the cause of traffic safety, especially in South Seattle. Seems to be kind of finding her voice. I think before people saw her as kind of a Sawant light, but now I think she's really carved out her own kind of areas of expertise. And so again, I don't know what's going on in her life, but it would surprise me if she didn't run again. I have no idea about Councilmember Strauss. He hasn't been super vocal. I mean, he's never been.
He keeps it pretty close to the vest.
He's a young guy. He probably, if he wanted to, he could probably get a pretty high-paying job somewhere else. So who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, so many different question marks there, but I appreciate your wrestling with all those issues with me there, David. I wanted to move on to a larger issue at the city and state level, and actually just talked about this with Councilmember Strauss. You heard it at the top of the show, the concept of design review and the idea of possibly doing away with it. So this is part of the process where buildings get built, volunteer design review boards make recommendations on, okay, this project fits the neighborhood, it needs more landscaping, things like that. But Seattle has suspended this process for affordable housing projects over the past 2 years now in the name of getting more housing online faster, especially during COVID. And now there's a push for this at the state level, too. There's actually a bill in the legislature, folks, right now that says, let's suspend design review for all new residential construction unless you're in a historic district. David, just a general thought on this. What do you think of this idea? Do we need design review?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is one of those, I remember starting City Hall in 2015 and not really anybody was talking about design review. And now I think the housing shortage and crisis has put a lot more focus on what gets in the way of building a lot of housing. And there are a lot of reasons why housing is not built in large scale in Seattle. But, I think design review is now being seen as one of those that slows down housing construction sometimes significantly. And it's not, it's one thing if it's design review from like okay, we got to make sure this building isn't going to fall down or it's, not going to create dangerous situation or something like that. But a lot of this is about like looks and aesthetics. And so I think what that's doing is people are starting to ask questions about, at a time when we're, housing prices are what they are, homelessness is what it is, and we're just not building enough housing for people. Should we really be delaying projects for as long as we are because someone doesn't like how the trim looks or whatever?
But then does it turn into a situation where, let me interrupt, it's just this whole idea of, well, then do we crank out these, cookie cutter apartments where everything looks the same and it looks the same from city to city? I guess that's the other side of this argument.
Right. Yeah. That is the other side of this argument. A lot of McMansions don't have to go through design review. And I'm not sure people would say that those are paragons of architecture. It's also an interesting scenario in which we are putting a lot of trust in the volunteers on this design review board to be the representatives of our taste. Maybe I like blocky apartments, but it's not up to me to say. And so, I guess it's just one of those. I think every step of the way between deciding something should be built and it actually being built and how much of it can be built is now getting new scrutiny. Whether each one of those steps is where the answer to our housing crisis lies is a question. But, I think there is undoubtedly not enough housing. That is not up for debate. And so whether or not design review is the problem or not, or whether it should be done away with, I don't know. But I do think it's kind of interesting and worth at least taking a look at these things. And, as a journalist, I find this kind of stuff fun where there's this room of people toiling away, deciding what looks good and what doesn't. I like when random little pieces of bureaucracy start to get a little light and people start asking questions about it, because I think it's
important to do
for sure.
Yeah, and it's taking the design review out potentially removes a little bit more of the public-facing process. I mean, city administrators would still do this work to make sure that things are fitting in the neighborhood and all that kind of stuff. But just briefly on this last piece here, this idea of exempting historic neighborhoods as they're talking about at the state level, that one feels a little dangerous to me too, because potentially that gets weaponized. Quick, let's become a historic neighborhood so we don't have to go through this, or we do have to go through this, etc. Help me out with that last part briefly.
Right. I mean, we see this in Wallingford. I'll admit, I never know. There's like different stages of when something becomes historic, and I always have a hard time of keeping track exactly where a certain thing is on that spectrum. I know that there has been some progress, some movement towards making Wallingford a historic neighborhood, which could potentially exempt it from needing to add density or growth. Wallingford is cute. It's super cute. It's a nice neighborhood. Is it historic? I don't know. And is this, and we have seen, I think this comes up with the tree canopy to a certain extent too.
Sure.
There are a lot of ways that people use something other than, just opposition to new housing to sort of slow down new housing. Again, I'm not saying do away with historic districts or historical areas, but I always think it's worth sort of examining people's claims, whether they are actually making those claims for the reason they're making those claims. No, that's a huge part of it. All right, well, coming up, following up on a story David's been working on for the past several months, traffic deaths in our state hit a near record high last year. We're going to talk about why on Transportation Talk.
Well, David, I saw a recent headline about traffic deaths in our state from 2022 at the highest rate we have seen since 1990. So the Washington Traffic Safety Commission there at the state level says we had 745 deaths statewide last year. More than half of them involved some sort of impairment. Let me know what you make of this report, because I know there's a lot of talk about lowering the blood alcohol level for drivers. What's going on here?
I think a lot of things are going on. I mean, the frustrating thing in Washington is, nationwide in 2022, there appears to have been at least a flattening of traffic deaths, or maybe even a marginal, very small decrease in 2022 compared to 2021. That is not true in Washington, which saw a 20% jump. So that is, traffic deaths have been up in Washington for a long time, but there was some sense that, well, this is happening nationwide. This is some kind of larger phenomenon that's driving this. That is maybe not holding up quite as well anymore because Washington is outpacing other states. So that's concerning. There's a lot of things going on, and some of them are kind of deeply systemic, which do not change overnight around roads that used to connect distant suburbs to each other because of the growth in this region. Now there's communities and shops and housing along those big roads. Tacoma's or Pierce County is a good example. I wrote about that before, which is like State Route 7. Used to basically be a highway between communities. Now there are whole communities along that highway. So
that's right.
That's a big driver. Big cars, people driving quickly because there's not as much congestion maybe. But impairment, I think, all those things are really tricky to figure out and to slow down. I think relative to that, impairment to lawmakers feels like something that maybe they can actually address in order. And there's some data out of Utah, which is the only other state in the country to go to 0.05 blood alcohol limit, which this would do, that seems to suggest that it had made a difference. And so it's interesting, it passed out of committee with both Republicans and Democratic support. In fact, it was of the people who did oppose it, a Democrat was one of them.
Right.
And I think it feels like within lawmakers' grasp to do something about that. Another sort of wrinkle to this that I'll have a story about this, I don't know, maybe tomorrow, maybe Thursday.
Okay.
The state toxicology lab, which processes all of these blood results, that's super backed up by like a year. And that is causing problems too, because somebody gets a DUI, but the prosecutors might not file charges because they won't have the blood results back. In the meantime, that person is still driving. There are several examples of people getting a DUI, not being charged because the backlog, and then getting another DUI in the meantime.
That's not okay.
So that's another issue that lawmakers need to deal with. But again, both of those things feel like, okay, we're not gonna rebuild all of Pierce County overnight to make it safer.
Yeah.
But maybe we can do a couple things that will take a few drunk drivers off the road and therefore lower some traffic deaths.
That's fair. We'll see what happens in Olympia with that one. But David, we need to wrap up, and I feel like it's time to check in on your garden. I know spring is a ways off, but are you just letting things lie dormant? Is it time to plant the cruciferous vegetables? What's going on, man?
Well, we put a bunch of compost down just to kind of prime the pump a little bit, and then here probably in a month maybe we'll start our indoor seeds. So
love it.
It's time to start thinking about it, which is at least an exciting time. I like this time almost better than the harvest time. It's just fun to think of. It's like spring training, there's so many possibilities.
I was going to say, which is a couple weeks away too. It times out great.
Yeah,
awesome.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love it. David, thank you as always for joining me. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. The podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you might listen. Please do find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon and show your support. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media, too. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.